Hi, I'm Nick Labonte. Welcome to Your Wednesday is My Monday. So today is a very exciting day. Today I officially start editing Saviors of Foul Arrest. Still haven't figured out the pronunciation of that word. Probably will. So it's a novel that I started working on November 1st as part of NaNoWriMo, which is the National Novel Writing Month, and the challenge is basically to write a novel in a month. So I started November 1st. By the end of the month, I'd written about 55,000 words, whereas the challenge is 50,000 words. And I just sort of kept writing. And January 17th, I finished the first draft, and then I left it alone until today. So today I started the edit. With that in mind, I think what I want to talk about today, what's been on my mind, is learning, and how along the way there's always these little moments where you realize that you don't know shit. So after writing the first draft of my first novel, writing some short stories, I've realized that as much as I think I know about writing, I really don't know shit, and I'm always improving. I'm always going to be improving. It's never going to happen that I'm going to write a perfect first draft that doesn't need editing. And I used to think that I could write without editing because I was used to people telling me I'm a good writer. And I thought that meant, oh, well, I don't need to edit. Editing is for people who aren't good writers. But that's not how it works. There's a story that I wrote over the past week or so for an anthology that I submitted yesterday. The deadline was tonight, but I really wanted to get that wrapped up before today so that I could just focus on the editing from here on out. And I was editing, and I kept going over it, and I kept finding things to fix. And I think, honestly, if I'd taken maybe even an extra week, I would have found things to fix on every read-through. I think it's important to know when to stop, and in this situation, I didn't really have a choice to stop. So this morning, when I woke up, I started the first edit of my novel. I started, first I had it printed out, partially because I think it's a lot easier to read it and edit it on paper rather than on a platform like Google Drive, which is what I wrote it on. But second, it's also, there's this feeling that comes with actually holding this thing in my hands to know that I wrote it and it physically exists. I took it from my brain and from these little notes and ideas that I scratched everywhere and then made it into something. There's something really satisfying about that. So I started editing, and I was sort of scratching out all the little mistakes. I could see like a word that wasn't very good, or a word that could get replaced, or a sentence that needed to be structured a bit better. And it took a long time. I only had about half an hour to do today, and I think I only did 4 or 5 pages. Now they're big pages. It's Arial 11-point font, single-spaced, and they're standard printer paper. So they're big pages, but still I expected to get a little bit more done. And I was thinking to myself that this process might not be the most efficient. So then I started, going on YouTube, looking up how to edit a book, and I found a YouTuber whose videos I'd watched a little bit before. I'm gonna link her here because I can't remember her name because I'm terrible with names. But one of the videos was literally how to edit a book, and she just goes through her whole process. I'm probably gonna be watching a bunch of these videos in the coming weeks, but the main thing I learned from this one is that my first edit should be focused on the broad strokes, so on the scenes that might not work too well, or plot points that need to be reworked or taken out. And then after that, I can start worrying about sentence structure, word choice, and all those things. And honestly, it's a really good thing I found that video, because I think if I kept going at the pace I started today, it would take me way too long to get through this thing once. When I talk to people about the book in real life, a lot of the times I push the amount of time that it took to write it, in the sense that I'm always mentioning it because in my mind it's a pretty great achievement, and I hope that I can maintain that pace going forward. but I always stress that I have no idea how long the editing is going to take. Usually because people always ask when they can read it. And that's been a huge, looking for my words here. It's really heartwarming to know that people want to read this thing I wrote. And that my being a writer isn't just this, oh, that's cool, you're a writer, cool. But people are actually interested in the things I come up with, which is a nice thought. But I'm not willing to let people get eyes on my first draft. I think I'm going to go through a couple edits before I start letting people close to me read it. And so all that to get back to, I have no idea how long the edit's going to take. So because I have no idea how to edit. It's not on a project of this size, it's something I've never done. And even editing short stories is something I'm just starting to kind of get the hang of. So it's important for me to take every chance I have to learn from people who've done it several times already. I mean, I think that in this day and age with the internet and YouTube and these platforms that give regular people voices, or writers that don't necessarily have the acclaim of somebody like Stephen King or George R. R. Martin, because these writers have this platform, they can use it to talk about their experiences and help others out. And it's something that's really great to see. I know on a certain level they do it to bring attention and awareness to their brand and their books and themselves as an author, but at the same time they're willing to, in exchange for that, provide so much value in their details of the workings of writing and their process, which I think is an incredible boon that as a writer in 2018 is a huge advantage over a writer, say, in 1958. Add to that the fact that if I wanted to, I could self-publish and never have to go through a publisher and just send my book to Amazon and sell it that way. And I don't think it's ever been easier to be a writer. It's hard. It's still hard, obviously. Writing is hard work, but being a writer now, I think, is the easiest it's ever been. I don't know if it's going to get easier or harder going forward, because since it's so easy to be a writer, to label yourself as a writer, the market is so saturated with different novels and different scraps of writing. And whether you go to a bookstore, you see how full the shelves are, and especially if you go in my personal favorite, the science fiction and fantasy section, you can see how many authors there are, how many different novels there are, and it's mind-boggling trying to choose something that you've never heard of. And that's not even mentioning Amazon and all the books that never make it to print and just live on there as ebooks. And I mean, there's a wide range of things. There's great things on there that are self-published, just like there's a ton of terrible garbage. So going forward, I don't know if that's going to be a bigger problem, this oversaturation of the market, but I know that in the present, as we speak, it's easier to be a writer than has ever been before. And that means that I have to stop complaining. I complain a lot about how hard it is to be a writer, but I have to remind myself that it's a lot easier than it was 50 years ago. Change the links here. So one of my biggest fears in editing my novel was that it would be absolute garbage and I'd want to throw it out the moment I opened it. That hasn't happened so far. I started the first chapter, and the number one thing that stands out to me right now is how long it is. It's 15-page chapter off these big pages, whereas most of the others are maybe 4 or 5 pages. and I'm not at the point yet where I think my writing is garbage and I should never have done this, but I think it's going to come. I think there's going to be that crisis of faith maybe in the second or third edit where, I don't know. I was thinking as I was learning about editing today about the difference between a first draft and a final draft, because it goes through a series of edits from the author, but it also usually goes through a professional editor, which sort of makes me think, what's left of the author's original vision with the finished product? And it kind of makes you think about what it means to be a writer, because there's sort of this view that writers are sort of these creatures almost that conjure things from midair, take ideas and thoughts and craft them into something that hopefully entertains or challenges people. But there's so much work that goes into that, from the initial conjuring to the final work. There's so much that goes into it. There's so much that gets changed, so much that gets moved around. And it makes you think, is an author who writes a killer first draft but doesn't edit better or worse than a writer whose first draft might suck but can edit a storm and polish even the worst draft into something great? I don't know which one I am. I'm going to see that going forward. But it's an interesting thought that of all the famous authors that we know, they probably fall in different ranges of that spectrum. Maybe even from book to book, each book goes on different ranges of that spectrum, and it sort of gives you an appreciation for the editing process. I think when you edit a short story, it doesn't feel nearly as big, simply because it's so much shorter. And while you still have a plot in a short story, and you have a similar structure to, say, a novel or any other longer work, I think with a novel, there's so much editing. Like, I'm looking ahead and I'm like, this is going to take months or years. I'm willing to do the work no matter how long it takes, but I have to remind myself that this isn't over and this is going to take a while. It's a sobering thought how much work goes into these things. You see an author like Stephen King, who publishes several books a year, compared to George R.R. Martin, who publishes a book every half decade. And it makes you wonder about their process and how different it is. And because one of the big things about Stephen King is he writes every day, and he writes about 2,000 words every day. But I wonder how that fits in with editing. Does he write 2,000 words a day and then also edits? I mean, it's also possible that he doesn't edit anything. He just writes a first draft and sends it off, and he gets edited by his publishers. But even if that's the case, it probably wasn't always the case. Now, should I be writing as well as editing? Because my usual day is at least 2 hours of writing. Now, I was thinking of switching that to 2 hours of editing daily to get through this book. But should I be writing at the same time? Am I still a writer if I'm only editing? It's going to be interesting to sort of figure out my process, because as I watch other writers on YouTube, they tell me what their process is and they give tips based on how they work. But I'm such a novice at the moment. I only started writing fiction professionally in that I wrote it for publishing, even though it hasn't been published yet. I only started doing that in September. So I'm at 5 months right now. I've been writing my whole life, but I've only been treating as professional work for 5 months. So, in 5 years, I hope to have a better grasp on my process. And that sort of reminds me how long-term this goal and this process is going to be. Because, sure, I can write a first draft in 2.5 months. But number one, maybe it's complete garbage and it's going to take years of editing to turn into something good. It might be good, but then it'll take months of editing to turn into something great. I don't know, I'm looking forward to sort of exploring that process, and it's a little bit daunting at first to think of all this editing that I have to do and all this discovery, but at the same time, there's this feeling like I'm an explorer, and there's so much ahead that I've yet to conquer and figure out, and there's a little bit of a thrill in it to recognize all these things that I still have to find out and figure out, and all this work I'll be doing to figure it all out. I don't know, I'm surprising myself. I'm feeling pretty optimistic about the whole thing. I'm looking forward to finding all this stuff out and working on my process. Maybe it'll change in 3 months when I'm a couple edits in and I want to bang my head against the keyboard, but for now, I'm actually looking forward to the work and figuring out my process. Yeah, I think there's a lot of good things ahead, and it's been a while since I've been able to say that, but I'm glad I can say it. On that note, I'm headed to work, so I'm gonna let y'all go. Follow your passion and realize that the work that's ahead of you involves so much self-discovery and so many things to figure out that you're really cheating yourself if you're not doing the work. Take care of yourselves.